Oh, I
Good
can
evening,
see.
everybody. We're live again for another amazing episode of the Connecting series. We always have interesting people on, and we've got a lovely lady here, Pamela Sofia. We're going to talk about a very interesting subject, actually, trauma and consciousness. It's something that I do in my work as well. So I think it's going to be interesting for me and interesting for everyone, really, because I think it's also a very good time to talk about this with what's going on as well in the world at the moment. So I won't sort of go on too much, but anyone who's watching, if you're tuning into us anytime during the live video, you can fire on some questions, and at the end we'll put any good questions to Pamela. If you've got any questions or any comments, really, just fire them over as we go on. But let's just get going, really. So I'll hand you over to Pamela then.
Oh. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say I'm not. I haven't got any formal qualifications in any of this. It's just my own personal experiences and things that I've read about, and my own intuition as well. So, so I thought basically I just wanted to describe how trauma affects us on different levels, and why it's important that we clear as much trauma as we can from our bodies. So usually the most trauma that's sort of, because it's stored in our bodies, when we experience any trauma, it's stored in our cells in our body, so it affects us on a physical level as well. So this particularly happens when we're young children, because when it's particularly below the age of 7, so we haven't got any filters. So before then, and particularly below the age of 3 as well. So we're like sponges, and we just absorb everything that's going on around us. And plus, we don't really have any, because we haven't got any life experience. We don't understand a lot of things. So anything can be a trauma to us when we're little, that we feel that we don't understand, where we feel that we've had something done to us that is not fair. But then you've got your major traumas, such as child sexual abuse and things like that. And what can happen is if it's a major trauma, but not necessarily a huge major trauma like child sexual abuse, it doesn't have to be that, but often it is with something like that, then it fragments our mind. So to protect ourselves, when we're really small, a part of our mind will fragment, and then we just block it out so that we can't remember it. And that's our body's way of protecting itself. But then the memory doesn't go away, because the memory is still stored in our cells. So then it will continue to affect us until we clear it. But that's how things like child abuse perpetuate into generations, because you've got no memory of it, and then you act out and repeat that cycle, often, not all the time, but often, to your own children without even realizing it. So just just ask me any questions you want.
Yeah, so that's really good. That's a really good intro there, Pamela. So, I'm going to sort of give you a few of my. This is something that I've dealt with for over 20 years, and a lot of the work that I do is, addictions and anxieties, but almost always they're from not always from young age, really, but they're always sort of trauma based to some degree. But I want to just give people a few examples as well, from my experience, and I'll give you a bit of an easy one. Well, this is not an easy one, but I'll give you an example where what you may perceive, and you'll understand what I'm saying here, Pamela. Your perception as a young child is very, very different to your perception as an adult. So I'll give you a good example, and all these are real real life examples people that I've dealt with. I had a person come to see me for a phobia, and a phobia is basically a kind of a trauma. Really, it's just not a very, it's, you know, they're not, they're related to very specific things, and it was a phobia about planes, flying, which is quite a common phobia actually.
Mm.
So there's always a reason for it. There's always a reason. There's always a starting point for it. You know, because when you get somebody who comes for an anxiety or a phobia, I always say they're all, even though they've almost always not got a recollection of where it starts or where it comes from. They can sometimes say, well, I remember it since I was, or so many years ago it started to happen, but it didn't just start to happen. Something has triggered something in the past, and this is, I'll give you
Exactly.
let me give you a good example, and you can comment on this, Pamela, you know, and see what you think. And this is, and all this was a learning thing for myself as well. So this person said, I've got a phobia of flying. So I use various things, but I use hypnotherapy quite often, because this is a very good tool to get to the root of it. Because you're dealing with hypnotherapy, you're dealing on the subconscious mind, and all these things are stored in the subconscious. I won't go into the big details, but basically, the subconscious mind is where all your habits are stored and everything, and all these triggers are. In the conscious state where we are now talking, don't have access to your subconscious. So the things in your subconscious you might not be aware of that are actually triggering you and sort of programming you, really. So anyway, so what happened is this lady, she had a phobia of planes. We went back to the past. So you basically have a suggestion in the subconscious to go back to a time when you started. And your mind is very powerful. Your mind knows exactly, your subconscious mind knows exactly where every trauma started. You don't consciously know of it. And you alluded to that earlier, Pamela, because the reason is, and you were right on this, the reason is because your mind, especially as a young child, your mind blocks out trauma as a protection mechanism. So you can't. Sometimes people do remember, but quite often they don't. And that's the problem. When they come for any kind of therapy with anybody, they don't know where the thing comes from, because you can't heal something if you don't know where it originates from. So this example is a very good example. So we said, we did the suggestion, go back to the point in time in your life where you had an issue around planes or flying. I'll cut a long story short. The person was recollecting a time when they were very young. I mean, might be 6 months, might be a year, two. It was a very young person sat in the back of a car going on a trip or something like that. And the parents must have gone inside to get something for the trip and closed the doors and went and came back. It must have only been, it felt like in the session, it wasn't much more than a minute or two. But during that time, that child of 6 months, a year, was traumatized by being left in the car on their own. And that was triggered. The phobia wasn't of flying or of planes. It was being trapped in that area, and the plane situation triggered the phobia, which was being next to the windows and everything. So reason why I want to mention this is because quite often, I suppose, the thing what the person has got the phobia of, or the fear of, is not always what the problem is.
Yes.
The perception, you see, don't forget the perception as a 6-month-old child, not understanding where you are really. All you know is you're enclosed, you've got doors, you've got windows at each side. There's nobody there. You've been abandoned, and then that has stayed with them forever, because in a 6-month-old mind for a child, the protection mechanism then comes up and says, this is not good, I'm abandoned, I'm going to be, you know, it's the fight or flight, it's the, you know, I'm going to die type thing. So it then says, stay away, basically your mind says, stay away from this, because it's not good for you, you know, you're in danger, you know. So as a 6-month-old child or whatever, you can imagine that being the logical reason. Obviously, moving forward, so 40, 50 years in the future, that is not, you would not have the same perception if you got locked in the car, or not locked in a car, but shut in the car for 2 as an adult. You don't have the same perception. But the subconscious mind remembers the initial time and remembers the trauma and remembers that they needed protection from that trauma. So that's an example of a trauma that's not what the person thinks it is. And the problem is getting over the trauma, which actually the process is actually really easy. But the problem is, if you don't know where the trauma originates from, it's impossible to cure it. You can only cure disease or ailments or anything if you go to the root cause. Otherwise, you're just treating symptoms, which is what the pharmaceutical company and the medical profession do, which is not really helping anyone. Curing the symptoms basically means you're just going to perpetuate the illness forever. Where you get into the cause of the illness, you're going to actually treat it for good. And you do. And all it is, how the mind works is your mind recognizing from your adult mind the situation, and then recognizing that actually the perception as a young child was not valid, that protection is no longer necessary, and literally your mind deletes it instantaneously. So from that second of that realization, that phobia or that anxiety or that trauma is basically deleted. The phobias is an easy example because it's one specific thing.
Yeah, I was going to say
trauma, dealing with multiple things, and it's linked together, so it's a bit more complicated. But phobia is a very easy example because you're dealing with a specific point that's triggered a specific response and a specific protection mechanism. And once you get through that, it's gone. Literally, you get a session and you have the experience, and the phobia is gone. Literally, if you do the process right, it's gone from that moment.
Yeah.
So I just want you to sort of throw that out as a good example.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, what I was going to sort of say is, I mean, it's funny you should say about like memories and stuff. Memories are really important. I mean, I've got memories like from when I was a baby, but I know that that one specific memory is of a loud noise that traumatized me, and it was just a normal noise of like cars, but because I wasn't used to it.
That's right.
So it just sort of, we just take for granted that a baby can perceive things in the same way that we do. That's not necessarily the case. And this reality is based upon trauma. So even the birthing process is traumatic, and especially the way that we do it in the West. It's not a natural process, and it's traumatic for babies. So even just being born here is traumatic. But yeah, and then it's like I say, the trauma, you might not be able to remember it consciously, but it will stay in the cells of your body, and that affects us on a physical level, a mental level, emotional level, and a spiritual level. So physically, it could make you crave. So when we talk about addictions, crave food that's not good for you, which will then try and what you're actually trying to do is block out emotions and numb yourself so that you can't actually feel anything.
Yeah, that's right.
The same with addictions to drugs and things like that. And also physically as well, if the trauma is stored in a particular part of your body, you might get your physical ailments, aches and pains that you there's no sort of medical diagnosis for, or things like ME and stuff like that. Although that's kind of more of a spiritual illness, but it's still stored in the body. And then emotionally, it, like the example that you just gave then, that was an emotional reaction to a response that had been triggered, that triggered that the unconscious memory, but in an emotional way. So that's what often happens. That's what often happens, say, with your phobias. Somebody will have an exaggerated response to a situation that doesn't really seem obviously connected to that situation, but it's what it's doing is triggering an emotional memory to the original trauma.
That's right.
And also as well, memories can be stored from lifetimes, so it might not necessarily be from this lifetime either. So
Yeah.
I had an experience of that where I had a phobia of death, which a lot of
Right.
people have.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's an
And
understandable
probably that's
phobia as
connected to
well, isn't
past
it?
life experiences,
Yeah.
but I had a real phobia. And as a nurse, that's quite, it's not a problem, but it was quite a significant phobia for me. And then I was doing angelic Reiki course, and we were doing like practice on each other. So the person that was practicing on me, she was like in tears at the end of it, and she said that this past life had opened up in front of her, and it was me in like the 14th century, and I was this like healer, but like, and I took my children out into the woods, and one of them fell, and she died.
Mm.
And
God.
then that was obvious to me that was where that phobia had come from, because then
Yeah.
I went on to work in the children's hospice.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting
So that
point.
was part of my healing. Yeah. So all that stuff is interesting. Then on a mental level, it can sort of affect your perception of reality, because you will perceive, you might not perceive it in its true form, and that most people walk around in, perceiving things in their own way because of the way that reality is formed. So we can only perceive it from our own experiences. But
Is
if
that something
what
like
we're saying is that those experiences are not conscious,
right?
and we don't have that self-awareness of
Mm.
why we're thinking in a certain way, then that can sort of help makes us perceive reality in a way that's not true to us, because it's not our reality.
Would that be something like cognitive dissonance then? You know,
It
if
would be
someone
something like what, sorry?
cognitive dissonance, where people
Yeah, kind of.
it's something it's similar to that. Then is that right? What you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. Or it might just be something like, like when you have a prejudice against something. So you might have that's just a simple example, but it can be more complicated, like cognitive dissonance as well. But if somebody has a prejudice against somebody who's a different colour skin, it might be because somewhere something has happened to them, which makes, or maybe they've something has happened to them, but they've not acknowledged that
Mm.
in them, because they don't want
Mm.
to look at it
Yeah,
mentally.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then spiritually, it can have an effect on us that it stops us fully embodying our souls, because where our cells are blocking the light coming in.
Mm.
So even though we might be able to sort of access, like do healing therapies and things like that, and we might be able to bring healing through us and light through us, but actually fully embodying our souls, where we hold our own energy all the time, it's preventing that from coming through, because we're not in our purest form. We're
Yes,
sort of
you've got
contaminated by all the,
on some level, aren't you, really?
yeah, we're not fully integrated. So if we're not fully integrated because we've got our minds fragmented, and we're not fully self-aware, we're not so we've kind of lost that connection over time. If we don't sort of clear ourselves, and we don't tune into our intuition as to what is best for us, we'll always be looking outside of ourselves, because we're fragmented, and that is what this reality kind of encourages. So I don't know what your thoughts about that are.
No, that's really, yeah, I agree with everything you said, really. I've got a couple of, I can give you a couple of good examples of the past life thing. Just to give people a bit of an example of what, you know, what kind of happens, and you know, and the impact of past life trauma. There was, I'll make it brief, because I don't want to make it you know, the full story. But there was one occasion where somebody had a client had a phobia, and at this stage didn't even consider past lives or anything. So it was just a phobia, a bit of an unusual phobia. It was a phobia of men. So that was a bit of an unusual one. But she was a young lady, I think early 20s or something. Really, you know, really a pretty girl. So there's no reason why but she'd always had this phobia ever since she can. She said ever since she can remember, that she can't have conversations with men, she can't have real proper relationships. So I was thinking it'll be some sort of childhood trauma or something, you know, because that's generally kind of what it is, especially when you can't remember. Session, and obviously the subconscious mind, like I said, goes straight to the issue, the problem, and then she started recalling the situation, and she's, I'm working in a kitchen with loads of other people, and you know, cooking up and stuff. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. And it carried on, and she was taking the food upstairs to feed the family. Anyway, cut a long story short, it turns out that this kitchen was in the 1800s or something, whatever.
Wow.
She was one of the kitchen. She used to work and live in the house. I think it was in London as well, actually. And this girl who I did the session for, she wasn't related anyway to that area. And in turn, so basically, back in, you know, when you work in these kitchens, you live there, and that's your job and that's your home, and you basically you get free board for working in that environment, and you're not allowed to speak to the man of the house, because you're classed as a servant and they're classed as the owner, or the man of the house, whatever. So she wasn't allowed to speak to the men, really, because she was classed as a lower level servant. And this was literally all her life. Her life was completely all this. She was born into it. Her life was serving and waiting on and cooking food and looking after the family. And she wasn't allowed to talk to the men or even look at the men. And this was that was it. And it never this was early this was kind of early when I was we're going back a lot of years now. So at this stage I wasn't thinking in the past. I wasn't even considering sort of past lives. So it turns out that it was because this was what was triggering the issue that she had now. So this was obviously the life after. She'd not dealt with that issue, or that trauma was brought forward from that life. But as soon as she recognised it, and I kept in touch with her a little bit afterwards, and you know, she changed literally instantaneously. And she became like a really big man eater. Then after that, she went out every night and things like that. So it's changed her life, really. And it was just because of that. And that was my first experience of having a trauma that was actually past life related. And I didn't expect it, because I didn't go into it with that thought pattern at all. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
So that just shows that it does, you know, that to me, I'm a proof person, and that to me was evidence and proof that past
I'm always
trauma
like,
comes from past
got to
life.
have evidence. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, so I mean, where all this is leading to is I can't really stress enough how important it is that we do listen to our bodies, but not our minds. You know, because while ever we listen to our minds, we'll always be manipulated. If we're not, if we're not, if we haven't dealt with all our trauma and everything, our shadow selves, then our mind can always be manipulated. So it's our bodies that we need to listen to, because our bodies never lie to us. And it's learning to sort of develop that skill, really, and learning to trust ourselves. So it's and that's what I found, that it's that my body's never lied to me. So I've always been, my mind has. So I have been led down like the wrong path a couple of times with like false like things and everything. But as for like us clearing stuff out, I mean, there's various ways. I mean, you obviously you do hypnosis, so that's a really good way. But everybody's different. It's this, you know, there's no one rule for everybody, and different things heal different people, and also as well at different times in your evolvement. It might be that you need this sort of certain thing at one time and then something else another time. But whatever, you know, like whatever we're sort of feeding ourselves, and we, you know, I eat chocolate and stuff, but whatever we're feeding ourselves stuff that's full of chemicals and full of toxins, we won't be able to hear our body properly. And then it just gets easier and easier once you start to hear it. It just gets easier. So and like just like any type of healing can help, but just asking the question. Usually, when you ask the question, then an answer will appear in some form. And it's learning to recognize the signs. So like say you're addicted to something and you recognize that you're addicted to it, but then you want to know why you're addicted to it and you want to heal it, then you just ask the question, oh, why? And then, you know, something will appear, like you might get a sign in a magazine, or you might be drawn to something, drawn to a certain book, or you might hear something on the radio, or something on YouTube, something on Facebook might pop up, and that sort of triggers your mind, think, oh, right, okay, yeah, that I asked about that the other day. I wonder if that could help me. And it's learning to sort of tune into those sorts of things, really, and then once you start doing the clearing, it never stops, because it's endless, really. But because we live in a reality that induces trauma every single day, and we have to look around us at the moment what's going on in the world. But it's really, that's why it's really important that we come back to ourselves and we clear it in some way. And then the deeper stuff, we can find some healing to help release that or integrate that. And when you were talking about cognitive dissonance, that could be related to disassociation. Is that what you were? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
That
right.
would be more from like your fragmented mind. So if you go into that even deeper, and then you're going into like your MK Ultra type trauma, which that induces disassociation.
I think fear's a big part of it, that though as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Fear can create that in itself because it's easier to disassociate than deal with fear sometimes, isn't it? Possibly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also not being in your body. So if you because I wasn't in my body for many years. For most of my adult life and a good portion of my childhood, I've not been in my body. To the point where I could hardly function. And then I had some healing work done on me, and I hadn't realised. I knew there was something wrong, but I hadn't realised that I was not in my body. And it was
Yeah.
only when I got the healing and then I came back into my body, then I was able to function more than I'd ever been, probably ever. That
Yeah.
then I
Yeah.
realised, yeah, yeah.
Let me
So
give you a good let me give you a little bit of an example of I don't know if this is disassociation or something, but I think it's relevant really or interesting.
okay,
Had a client who had very deep trauma. A lot. I think it was very long standing trauma. Um, and so they'd been to try every kind of therapy going and stuff, and they kind of not really got anywhere. But I'm not going to kind of go into that in major detail, but I'm going to tell sort of mention about how what sort of state they were in because it was disassociating to such a degree, I suppose, that they lost short term memory and they were continually losing more short term memory. Not an old person. It's nothing to do with dementia. Well, certainly I don't think so. But there was the trauma that this person was being continually or triggered by or whatever was then causing the person to completely the short-term memory was basically not there, and I've never seen this before. This is a very unusual thing, and it got to a stage where the ability to deal with the problem was very badly hampered because the short term memory was just not there. I think I can't remember if it was weeks or months, but it was an ongoing process, and I think it was actually getting worse. So there was something. It was way beyond my sort of skill set, really. I've never seen it before, but there was some certainly serious trauma gone on, and disassociation had created that such a. I mean, I'm imagining it as in blocking out certain things, like we talked about with trauma, and this was blocking out like literally a massive, huge time frame.
yeah,
So that was, I just thought that was never really got to the bottom of that. And as far as I know, the person's not. I don't think there's they haven't found a way around it yet. So I thought that was a bit. That was an extreme example of what can happen, and that was trauma based. That was a trauma based mental problem that the person had. And but as I say, we tried a number of times with different therapies, and we couldn't get anywhere. So that's an extreme example, but it's an example that it's something that you need to deal with because these things don't
oh
get
yeah, absolutely,
people
yeah.
think, people could think, oh, if you've got a bit of an anxiety or a trauma or whatever, oh, you'll be all right in a few years. But actually, it gets worse because it's every time you're triggered by a trauma or something, it kind of builds it in your
Because
mind.
it gives more power. It gives it more
Yeah.
power over you. So, and it's a vicious cycle then, because then gains more power, and then you can't embody your light and stand in your own power. It's kind of like a bit of a demonic, can become a bit of a demonic energy almost.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, and that's when you
it's
sort of see your major mental health problems sometimes
yeah,
as well. I think that's probably
big
connected
time.
to that.
You're right, Tommy. Because if you disassociating yourself, you're stepping out of yourself, really, aren't you? In a way,
Well,
mentally.
yeah, and as soon as that's what I was meaning, as soon as you can soon as you're not in your body, you're not in control of it, and you're not in control of your mind, and that's
Yeah.
when you can be manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I just
And
want
that's
to
when you see your
talk,
possessions and all the rest of it.
yeah. I want
Not
to touch on
easy to
something
get a
that you
bit.
said, Pamela, previously. If you can go into it in a bit more detail. You mentioned about the mind affecting cells in the body, or the body specifically. Can you go into that in a bit more detail about, you know, and how sort of that would work, or in your understanding of that?
This is it's not science based. So it's just my completely my
Yeah, your understanding.
my perception is that it would, well, this is just my own logic really, is that when you've got a trauma or something, and you're anxious about something, it's in your cells, and your cell will be constricted, it won't be working properly.
Mm-hmm.
So everything won't be able to sort of flow through your cells properly, so they won't be functioning to their optimal performance,
Mm-hmm.
particularly from an energetic point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But also like your lymph, they clear it. That's what clears your body.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that if things are constricted, then they're not going to be functioning properly. That's my point of view anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interest, because I don't think people consider this really when, you know, when people talk about anxiety or trauma or whatever. They think, oh yeah, it's your mind, and you know, you've got, you know, you need to change your thinking. But there's also an effect on your body, which you mentioned. I think you mentioned earlier as well that you can your traumas and your triggers and things can be triggered also by your body, because
Yeah.
traumas can not just mental, they can be physical, and
No, but also as well, your body, particularly, my body's got three brains. So you've got the brain in your head, then you brain in your gut, the brain in your heart. They've all got like neurons, their own, so they function independently as well as all functioning together. So like your gut, you know, that's huge. So there's been studies that have shown that the right concentration of probiotics, you know, like your healthy bacteria in your gut affects your mental health. So
yeah.
everything, you know, so if your cells are not functioning properly because you've got a trauma or something, or you're anxious about something, because you know that yourself that if you're anxious about something that you know about, that you're conscious of, then you know, some people have gut
That's
symptoms
right.
from that. Yeah, you get butterflies in your tummy, or worse, you might have like physical symptoms. Um, so your gut does respond to your emotions, and it can also. So then you know, if you imagine that um, your cells aren't functioning properly in your gut, and then you're craving food to comfort those emotions, that then don't make your body function properly either, and are clogging up your cells, then that just you know, it's just like a vicious circle then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas if you can break a part of that cycle in whichever way, so and it'll be very individual for each person.
Yeah.
So for some people it might be the diet. A lot of people concentrate on improving their diet because they think that that will because it makes them feel better emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Some people concentrate on the energy work because it makes them, for the same reasons, and it makes them feel better physically. Personally, I think it's a combination of everything. But you might start off at a certain point in that cycle, and then helps you a lot. But I think that if you just concentrate on one area totally and you ignore the other areas, then it'll still be there somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's about balancing it really with the
Yeah.
really. You know, I've done a little bit of kinesiology, and that's kind of it. You've got to balance all the different areas.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, I think health really, if you sum health up, balance is the. I always say balance is the key to health. If your
Yeah,
mind,
definitely.
your emotions, your mind, and your body are balanced, you will be in good health. Because disease is just disease, isn't it? Really. So
Yeah, disease. It's exactly what
you
it says
know,
on the tin.
yeah, exactly. There's something else that kind of just came to me then. I don't know if this is relevant or linked, or or even if it's just interesting. But you've heard of Louise Hay, haven't you?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, so because Louise Hay, this is about your thinking and how that. So this is kind of similar to what we talked. How your thinking affects actual parts of your body. So, for example, if you've got a mindset which is a fear of moving forward, then you'll generally have problems with your legs or your feet or something. If you've got a problem thinking out, that can often affect that mindset can often affect a problem with in your throat. So by clearing that mindset, you can often clear physical manifestation, which is what Louise Hay says really. And my experience is that that's true. That your mindsets and it can be really bizarre things, you see, that because when your mind gives your body a message, your body's not a sort of a genius. If your mind says, oh, I don't want to move forward, your body doesn't understand what that means, but it interprets it in a certain way. I think this is kind of connected in some way. Obviously trauma is a bit more of an
But your body, you see, it's the body that's telling you though, isn't it? Because you've got the physical problem. So actually it's your body that's telling you. Whereas if you ask your body why it's developing that symptom, then it will tell you probably.
Yeah, but is it your body or is it your mind that's created the problem with your body? Which
Well, I don't know.
Is it the mindset that where I personally think it's the mindset. I'm not I don't know, but I'm just thinking.
I don't know.
Is it your mind? Is it a mindset? If you wake up one day, let's use this time as a good example. I don't want to move forward. I don't want to, or whatever it is. If that's your constant thought process that's going boom, 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 that is going to impact your body. I'll give you an example of this, and people that will
I understand what you're saying.
I mean, it could work the opposite way around as well.
Yeah, but sometimes, but if that's not a conscious thought, and then I'm thinking more. Yeah, you're thinking more if it's a conscious thought. I'm thinking more if it's an unconscious thought, and you are an unconscious motivation or belief or whatever.
Yeah.
And you develop the symptoms.
Yeah.
Then that's your body's way of telling you that there's something.
I think it's the same thing, you see, because I think it's the same thing. Whether it's a conscious or a subconscious, you still feel
Yeah.
But whereas the difference is, you see, if it's a conscious thought, you'll know you're doing it, or you might not know.
Yeah.
Probably work out. But the problem is, going back to the original stuff, if it's a subconscious, let's say subconsciously you've got a problem with speaking out, but you don't really realise that you have, or you don't think it's a big issue, but subconsciously that is going round and affecting your body, then you won't necessarily be aware of it, would you, maybe?
No, you wouldn't, but your body's telling you.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's what I'm meaning about intelligence. Yeah.
So I think that's connected up
the
as well.
Same thing, but different way around.
Yeah. So you could so potentially, I mean, I'm not saying that all ailments are this, but potentially if you've got a physical illness, you could back engineer it really if you wanted to go along that road and if you believed in that. If you had throat problems consistently, and I think this is right, and I've had clients where I think this is right, and there's speaking out issues going on there, or if you've got people with oh God, this is I can't remember where this came from, but there's some experience that somebody who had a hearing or issue. It was because they didn't. It sounds really stupid, but they didn't want to listen to what
No,
people were.
no, I
Create a
completely get
very
that.
serious ailment,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. But also as well, I had an issue with I had a previous injury on my left ankle, but that was like a long time ago, like many years ago, and then it's about 3 years ago, I was having real problems like walking on that ankle,
Mm,
and I knew that. Well, I was also at the same time I was having um like not panic attacks, but I was having periods where I was struggling to breathe. So anyway,
mm,
a friend of mine he scanned me and he found an implant in my right hip.
right.
So he removed it, and then I could walk again on my ankle. So
Mm,
that was my body telling me that there was something wrong.
yeah, that's
And that was
interesting.
definitely not my mind.
No, no, no. I
Yeah.
think
No,
I'm
that
probably
not
both
definitely not
ways.
being put there by my mind.
Principle's
Yeah.
the same, though, isn't it? Really, I suppose it's just kind
Mm.
of they're talking to each other, aren't they? I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It's the
Mm,
two-way thing. Yeah.
mm. No, that's really yeah, that's
Mm.
really there's a lot of aspects to this really. I mean, I'll I can give you another quick past. This is actual past life one. This one because we
All
was
right. Yeah.
went into it specifically for past life. This one, and the person it was when someone wants to look into it, and we could go. I don't know if we want to go further on this track.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Because I think this, or maybe we can continue on another time. But this is a bit of an interesting field in itself, really. But the person, if someone said, I'm interested in past lives, what do I do? I always suggest go to a past life that's relevant to this life, because other than that, it's good to have an experience if you want, but if you
Mm.
want real meaning in it, go to a past life
Mm.
that's
Mm.
relevant to the life that you live in, because in my opinion and my experience, they are connected, and
Mm.
we can go into lessons and we can go into that sort of stuff maybe at another time if you want, because it's probably a full talk, that one anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this example, so we did. She said, just do one that's relevant. I said, well, it'll mean more to you. So anyway, did a session, um, and I have to be honest, do quite a few sessions. I quite enjoy the past life because they are sometimes really interesting. Find out interesting things, but
Mm.
this one was really, really, really boring. Um, um, she didn't have a great life. I don't remember the time, sometime a few hundred years back or whatever. But living before they had sort of plastic surgery, so that she was born with a bit of a disfigurement, I think. But the family was sort of wealthy, so they had a bit of money. They had a house garden. So whereas they were well off, they had money, but because she was classed as a bit of a, I don't know what you call her nurse does, but she was a bit disfigured, so the family wouldn't let her go out and see other people. So she was basically confined really to this, even though it was quite a big garden and a big house. She was confined
Mm.
to this for all her life basically, because the cat, I suppose, were kind
Oh.
of ashamed of her. Anyway, this was the life really. It's a bit of a tragic ending. She threw
Mm.
herself off a cliff at the end and killed herself due to
Okay.
loneliness. So I was thinking, God, because when you do a session with anyone, any sort of therapy, you hopefully want a good outcome. And I thought, oh, that's a bit depressing and stuff, and I don't really know. To be honest, I just thought I can't imagine getting anything out of that. So afterwards, when you have a chat, and I said, well, what did you get anything out of that, and did it have any meaning for you? And she said it answered all my questions, because in this life
Oh.
I can't bear to be on my own. I have to be around people all my life. If I'm on my
All
own, I
right.
can't cope. I go into sort of really panic mode. And she says, I've never known, and now I know why I've got that, why I'm like that. So whereas
Wow.
it didn't seem anything in that life to me, but to that person, it had
Mm.
a lot of meaning. And it was obviously it was trauma from a past life.
Mm.
So obviously that will have changed her mindset in some way. But that's an example. That's another good example, you know. So, and as I say, we could go on this track another time maybe, but we can talk about the fact of what impact past lives have on, if you believe in past lives, or whether they're real or whether they are, or whether it's just a construct or whatever it is. But there is a connection, in at least in this respect, of things that you
If you
think about.
haven't healed them in any traumas in your past life, then they carry through into your subsequent lives.
Yeah.
I had a past life regression, quantum, the one that Dolores Cannon invented.
Oh yeah,
quantum HQ something, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I went to 3 different past lives. One of them was a really traumatic one. So it was when I was in apparently it was when, well, I saw it actually. So in Atlantis. So I was like with this guy who was meant to be my master. So he was meant to be training me to be like him. So but really he tricked me, and he kept me keeping me captive.
Right. Oh,
So I was like his slave. And I escaped, and he murdered me.
Right. Go on.
Yeah, so that was quite traumatic. Yeah, so then I've kind of made sense, in that I carried through this thing of like being tricked by people.
Right, yeah.
And then another past life, I was in Egypt, and I was a priestess to the Bast, the Egyptian cat.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I was in, and I didn't know that they were. I just heard of Isis priestesses before. I'd not heard of this sect, but I looked it up afterwards, and there were a sect. So I was like, so in this past life, I was like, I wasn't allowed to worship the Bast in public, because the truth had been inverted. So that's must have been when, so it went from worshipping cats and females to inverting it, and that must be when the patriarchy came into force. So I was worshipping this effigy, this cat, in a basement somewhere with a candle.
We still worship cats though now, don't we? So
yeah, I've always liked cats. Yeah,
I worship like cats.
I always had a cat. I've always had a cat. I've not got one at the moment, but my dog thinks she's a cat anyway. So, but yeah,
something just come to mind about I don't know. Like, again, I'd like to get your opinion on this as well, Pam. So, I'll give an example of what happens if you don't deal with a specific trauma. I think this is quite interesting as well. It kind of fits in with a little bit what we've been talking about, really. I'll use a common one, whereas, and this is a very common one. If you've had some kind of abuse in the past, it doesn't really matter what type it is, but this is the general thing. If you've had abuse in the past, and you block it out with, like you've mentioned before, with alcohol or drugs, which is this basically suppresses the problem. You're not curing it really. So you've got this, so you haven't dealt with it basically. And then what happened? This is from my experience. What I've found with working with clients, what I've found is, if you don't deal with a specific trauma around a specific situation, that will continue to come round in your life until you've learned it.
definitely.
And I think it's a kind of important point. So if if you've had an abusive relationship, let's use that as an example. If you had an abusive relationship, I've worked with quite a lot of clients that have had. If you don't deal with it, if you kind of ignore it, suppress it, whatever the case may be, you'll find that your next relationship will be the same. Because
yeah.
And I don't, I'll get you. I like to get your opinion on that. Really, yeah. I think there could be multiple reasons. I think on some level, people can sense that people.
I think abuse is a very specific. It's quite different to other traumas. In that it is an actual what's the word? It's just abuse, but it sort of sucks the power. It takes your power,
disempowers you, doesn't it?
Completely disempowers you. So rather than say with a phobia, when you've got a phobia, it just creates a fear in that moment. When it's an abuse, because it's to do with relationships, that fear will affect your relationships throughout your lifetime until you've actually healed it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, for instance, my mum was quite a narcissist. She's quite a narcissist, even though she shouldn't realize it, but she's quite narcissistic. And so even up until recently, I've had issues with narcissistic bosses, female.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's and things like that multi-layered as well. So it's not just a case of you like with something like the examples that you've given. You gave an easy example. You can just like heal it like that. With abuse, I think, because it's multi-layered, because it affects you at a spiritual level as well. So I think it's different layers of healing with it as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, but I think it's interesting that when you, if you don't recognize, it's almost a bit like we talked about with the lessons in the past life. It's almost like a reoccurring lesson, really, until you've managed to deal with it. I kind of see it a bit like that. When you mentioned just now about, I wonder if you could just kind of talk a little bit about how trauma affects you on a spiritual level, or how it affects you, or anything like that.
So on a spiritual level, if you're like we talk about if you're not able to embody your spirit, so we don't fully come into our bodies, we come in little bit, like by little bit. So the disassociation is, if somebody's completely disassociated, then they won't be able to embody any of their spirit, because their mind's fractured, so their consciousness is all over the place. So they lose that connection for their spirit. And it's being able to embody our spirit. So by little, by clearing ourselves out of whatever crap we've got in us, from on a physical level, on all those levels, mental, emotional, then we allow more of our spirit in, because we can sort of connect with our higher selves better, and then that allows it to come into our body. That is the ultimate goal, as far as I'm concerned, is being able to embody as much of our spirit as possible. And that's when we can be our authentic selves. So it's about being authentic, standing in integrity, and it's about purifying yourself on all levels, which we probably can't achieve in one lifetime, but it's and it depends what you feel your purpose is as well. You might not want to do that. It's all about choice, really, isn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But to be able to stand in our own power, and to be able to, once we are able to embody our spirit as much as possible, then we can affect our physical reality
That's
more. And that's what they don't want us to do, which is why they traumatize us consistently. And that's what they want us traumatized, because they don't want us to embody our spirit, because they don't want us to affect our reality and be in control of our reality. They want to control and manipulate our minds and our bodies so that we create the reality that they want.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Is that? So let's imagine that somebody is disconnected from their spirit or whatever. Does that would then make them susceptible to other things spiritually, or other energies?
Or they could be possessed.
That's what I mean. So
yeah.
Disconnected.
So it depends how much. I could talk about this forever once we start getting into.
Let's just quickly.
Say as superficial as you want, or go as deep as you want, but yeah, it can get to basically. Once you're not in your body, then your body's open. It's like, it's like free for anything else to step into, really. So that could be from anything from a spirit that, and especially people who've got addictions, there's particularly to alcohol and drugs, then they attract earthbound spirits which were addicted to those substances, which can then they can take over their body. But even something that's like, we're going a little bit off topic now, but even something like channeling, you're allowing something to come into your body that you don't really know where it's from, just where it tells you it's from.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you do that repeatedly, I think that you're at risk of getting taken over. We need to stand in our own power, and we can only do that by standing in our own integrity. So, and that means protecting our own energy. There's a lot of things that, and I think that there's a lot of things out there that, and trauma again, it can damage your energy, so it can cause kinks and tears in your auric field, which can allow dark energies to come in. And then they manipulate your mind, and that's also as well when you can get people who have like dark thoughts and depression. Sometimes that is to do with stuff like that.
So if somebody did get into that state, let's say, what's how do they sort of get, how do they sort of come out of it, really? Providing they've not obviously not completely lost. I mean,
it's a difficult one, really. You've got to really want to. I think at some level you've got to really want to.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's very true, actually. I've had clients where actually they don't really want to deal with it, and then you're wasting your time, and they're wasting time really as well. So you're right. Like there's got to be a desire on their part, aren't there, really, to want to do it.
Absolutely.
It's not that somebody saying, I've got clients who come to me for various reasons, and the partner told them to come, or they thought they should come for someone else, but they're not. Unless they want to deal with it, they're not really going to get anywhere, really.
No, I think there's a lot of people experience a lot of things that are really quite awful and can break people. I mean, people come through the most horrendous things, but it's the spirit that gets them through. So even though the power of the human spirit is unbreakable, so all you need is that little bit of courage or faith or whatever you want to call it, that you really want to get through it, and you can do.
So this might be a bit of a deep question, but let's see if it's worth
Go on
going
then.
about it all or not. You mentioned about the planet, or where we are now, or the reality we are now, whichever, being a trauma based planet or trauma based realm, whatever. I can't remember the exact term you used. Do you want to kind of go into that a bit and explain why you think that is, and what's the reason behind it, and a bit more about into that? Because when if people are watching,
Okay.
we mentioned we're in a trauma based reality, people won't really
Yeah.
understand what that is.
I mean, how deep do you want to go into that one?
Try shallow first, and then if that doesn't work, we'll go deeper.
Right, okay.
See if we can sum it up in a sort of a simplistic way for the person on the street who believes in lockdown. So
Right, okay. So basically, we're food for beings who it's kind of a bit of a prison, this place, a bit of a prison, and that we've basically been so traumatized to be able to, and disempowered, we've forgotten what our power is, and that's been done deliberately so that we are kept here in this reality, and so that we don't evolve to the next level, because they feed off our fear and or our section. It's the reality is being inverted. I briefly mentioned that before. So everything that we perceive as being truth isn't truth. It's the opposite way around. So, and that sort of links into the trauma, because it's like that's how the subconscious, it's the subconscious mind. So it's like this planet is a bit like a huge subconscious mind. So it sort of behaves in the similar way to what your subconscious mind behaves when it's traumatized. So
like a collective trauma.
Yeah. Well, that's what it creates. It creates like a collective consciousness of trauma, but then that consciousness of trauma then connects into each individual consciousness and triggers the traumas. So that might manifest in such as, like, you hear like terms like negative feminine. So there's certain attributes of the negative feminine, such as the martyr or whatever, and then you've got your negative masculine as well, and the opposite of those would be the divine feminine and divine masculine. But they don't want anything that's divine.
Right. That's so
it's quite a big topic to explain in simplistic
terms. We could just touch on it just for people, so because if you mention that, they'll be thinking, I don't really understand the concept of that. But so would it be fair to say then, if that's the case, if we're in a trauma based reality now, if we're here as an experiencer, then would it be fair to say that our mission is to sort of recognize our divine purpose then? Would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think for most people, maybe not for everybody. Maybe some people don't want to.
Right.
That's fine.
So so let's just say, for example, let's just say we've got 1 million people on the planet. Would you say that all those 1 million people that are here now will their mission or their lesson, if you want to put it like that, would be to ascend or recognize their divinity or their light or whatever way you want to put, or would you say that there's only a percentage of people who've got that and the other people are on a different program? Would you think, what would you say that then? Or
I think probably. I think it's unrealistic to expect everybody to reach enlightenment or but I do think that once we embody a certain amount of our own light, we have got the ability and the power to create our own reality, if consciously rather than unconsciously, which is that's another thing, you know, of like being traumatized and the collective consciousness of trauma. We keep creating the trauma. Yeah, so if we do it on an individual, so imagine like one individual going around with all this unconscious trauma, and we keep having these emotional triggers, having these warped perceptions of reality, you know, and that's to a lesser or greater degree. You know, I'm not saying that everybody's warped, but but sometimes we do have like often we have like a perception of something that's not completely true. So it might be that we take a dislike to somebody, and it might just be because somewhere in the past they remind us of somebody that's hurt us. Yeah, but we don't really understand why we don't like that person. Yeah. But on a, you know, and that can be on a bigger level. So if that one person is just continuing to, because you said yourself that you keep attracting situations into your life that that a similar situation until you've healed that trauma. So imagine everybody's doing that. We're just continuously creating all these traumatic situations.
I think a very large percentage of people are doing that.
Yeah. Whereas when once we've embodied a certain amount of our light, then we can consciously create the things that we do want. And I don't mean like the law of attraction stuff, because I think that that's based on mind rather than spiritual.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit out of balance, because it concentrates on you wanting to manifest material stuff. Whereas I'm talking about being in balance, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, so that you manifest the things that are best, you know, like for your highest good or whatever. Or but yeah, we have that power. So, you know, if a few people are able to do that, then I don't know whether that would happen in this reality or whether we would be able to do that in another reality. I'm not sure about this whole ascension 5D thing.
No.
I'm open minded about it, but I do believe that we definitely have the power to change our reality.
So do you think potentially, would you say that everyone potentially has a potential to connect to their spirit, divinity, or light, or whatever? Or do you think certain people are just here as extras? You know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's my honest answer to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. 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 It's quite fascinating stuff, really. Let's just that seems like a good place to take a little pause. So we've got a few comments on the
Okay.
anyway.
Oh, my dog's come say hello now.
Oh, hello. What's the little dog called?
Sasha.
Sasha. Oh, hello, Sasha.
Down.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, this will be available for people to watch going forward anyway. So Gail's commented about no idea where phobia of height comes from. So there is, as I said, there's lots of ways to find out. You can there's different therapies out there, and there's ways of finding out. It might not be, it might not be a height phobia actually. Chances are it probably will be, but it might not be a height phobia. They all come from somewhere, and as we've talked about, it could also come from a past life as well. That's a very real possibility. She mentioned, I don't know if you got a comment on this, this Pam, but she's mentioned also, this is in relation, I think she says in relation to trauma and maybe past life trauma as well. She's had sessions of shamanic healing, which has really helped.
Yeah, it's whatever helps you really. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, shamanic healing definitely, because you can do like soul retrieval in shamanic healing, so that helps with the integration and stuff.
Yeah, there's lots of things out there, and like Pam said originally, there's lots of different lots of different gateways to sort of uncovering these traumas and your programs and your triggers and all these things. So I've seen, for example, I've not done myself, but I've seen a very good example of somebody clearing a trauma by Reiki, which I found fascinating. And literally the huge explosion of emotion and release just from Reiki alone. And
I've done stuff like that. I also once did an entity release. I didn't intend to do it, but I did an entity release on this girl once with angelic Reiki. I don't do angelic Reiki anymore actually, but yeah, that was like it was an ET entity.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what we mentioned before is we're gonna maybe come back for a few more talks as well, but let's on specific things that might have popped up, and I think that's one particular subject that I think it might be interesting to touch upon, is that the ET sort of situation. Now we've sort of set the scene really. That might be another interesting subject.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's a bit of a I think it's a subject for a night anyway. I don't think it's something you can do in 5 minutes, but I think that's and I've got a bit of experience in that field myself, so I think that's very interesting. I think that'll be very interesting talking, especially connected to what we've already talked about. We've already kind of
because it all links in. Yeah.
So I think let's have a see. We've got any more comments? Everyone comments just saying, interesting discussion, getting a lot out of it. So
that's good.
Share us out, and we'll be back probably for another session at some stage. So before we clock off today, is there anything that you want to end on, Pam, in relation to this subject? Just maybe on a positive vibe, maybe a healing way.
Just to remember that we are so powerful. We do have the power, and just not to forget that ever. That's the most important thing.
I think you're right, Pamela, and you mentioned there as well, which is kind of the point of maybe the talk as well, is that if you do the work and you get rid of your traumas, you are then a clear channel, to the good energy, the light energy, really, and that's when you can really start making a big difference to you and everyone, really. If it is a collective consciousness or whatever, really. Just one thing, but I've kind of just before we finish, and on a more of a positive note as well. If as you mentioned about this reality, it being a trauma based reality or planet, if let's say people escape or whatever, from this from this place, what do you see, or what do you feel is the next stage, or other possibilities, really?
I'm
Yeah. If I was
Yeah,
to say to
I
you
don't
now,
think it'd be like this, Florence. I
no,
don't think it'd be like
hopefully
here,
not.
and
Hopefully
it
not.
won't be like the astral level either, fourth dimension.
Right.
So that's just a simulation of here, or it can be. It can really be. It's like mainly a mental level. So
Mm,
it's like, but again, and that is like a prison. So, and most of the time when people are tuning into the higher levels, that's where they're tuning into.
mm,
Um, I think that above there, the levels and a pure consciousness. So, but you do have like physical beings as well, but just not as physical as here, not as dense.
right. Mm, that's interesting. So there's a lot more. There's a lot more up there, isn't there? Really. So.
I think so. I think probably a lot more than what most people realize.
Mm,
That things I'm coming across things now that I'm I've only just it's new to me, and it's making me think about my own views on the
mm,
subject. So
yeah. Well, I think that's the key. That's the beauty of these kind of talks, where people might have a listen and think, and it gives them something to think about, and a different perspective as well. Because
yeah,
we're all picking things up as we go along, aren't we? Really, and
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
don't we don't know the we if we knew the full picture, we wouldn't be here in the first place. I don't think, would we really? So it's there's lots of it's lots of interesting stuff going on, and
Mm,
so that's been a very interesting talk, really.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
we'll probably, thanks for coming, Pam, and we'll probably come together at a later stage with something else as well, maybe somewhere an offshoot of this, maybe.
Yeah,
Um, as I say, because I think it's the more sort of rabbit holes you go down, the more sort of things you find, it's never ending, really, isn't it?
never
So.
ending. I realised that about a couple of years ago. It's like sometimes the more you go down the rabbit holes, the more confusing it can get as well.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah,
but that's, I suppose that's, for people who are switched on or in tune or interested even, it's something. It expands your awareness at least a little bit, doesn't it? Maybe, and it
yeah.
gives and rather than thinking that this is all there is, that if that was it, then that would be a
Oh
trauma. That would
God,
be a traumatic situation. So that
big
this is
trauma.
it. I mean, that would be the end, wouldn't it? So I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think there is better things out there. You know,
yeah. Either that or we're delusional, but I think I'd rather be delusional and
I
believe
think
that.
I
And
don't think there's any point in being on the other side, really. You've got to think, because if you believe that you create your own reality anyway, there's no benefit in going round, thinking,
no,
it's the end
well,
of the world all
I
the time.
know that for a fact because I've had experiences of that.
Mm,
So that are too much of a coincidence, really. But
yeah.
that can be
Mm,
saved for another time.
yeah. Yeah. Well, we could go on all night, but we won't do, because
No.
people, will probably be. This is probably enough for everyone for now. But
Yeah.
as I say, we'll come back again. So, um, is there anything you want to put out to people? Any information or any contacts you want to put out to people that, I don't know if you've got a website or information, or
Mm,
anyone you want to direct people to it. 'Cause this is your moment to, if you want to put anything out, if anyone's watching this and wants to find out a bit more about anything.
I mean, you can put the link to my Facebook page under here if you want.
Hmm.
Um, I am going to be doing more work online, so I'm going to be doing more sort of workshops online to do with
Mm,
because creativity as well is another really good way
mm,
of getting trauma because that gets right in your subconscious. So that's
mm,
why that's why they're trying to stop being people from being creative as well.
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so something like, you know, like a meditation or something, and then with some creative work afterwards, which can help to release block traumas, maybe some webinars, and also as well, I'm going to be, what I want to do is a storytelling, as
Mm,
in telling people stories. So I think that's really important. It's another, it's a validation of your life.
mm,
Um, it's and it's something that we used to do in old ancient times, which we've lost.
yeah.
We're more concerned with being entertained now, and it
Yeah.
kind of, and the entertainment, especially with reality TV and stuff like that, it makes our life seem boring and purposeless. But
Yeah.
actually, it's usually in the real human stories that you can find that connection.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And well,
So,
we've done a couple of talks already, Pam, with people. They were kind of pretty much life stories, and that was much more interesting than anything
yeah,
I
yeah,
see. And that was real stories from real
yeah,
people.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think you're right about
yeah.
that. So
So yeah,
there,
and then I'll maybe tell my story as well one day.
yeah. Well, if you want to come on here and do that one day, you're more than welcome. As I
Hmm.
say, it's an open thing. So we'll sign off for tonight anyway. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Even if you're watching on record, you can still share us out. So share the video, and watch out on our page, the Mind Body Soul Festival. Just like the page, and if there's any updates, any more interviews, you'll get the updates then. So there we go. We'll sign off for tonight, and again, thanks for coming, Pam.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye.
Bye then.